All right, welcome back to another episode of the Know Your Numbers podcast. This is your host, Chris McCormick, and I have with me a very special guest in the name of Frank Castillo. Frank is a Boston native, and he is an accountant by birth, really. He was born on tax day, April 15, and ever since then, he's held a CPA and has looked to improve the lives of accounting professionals through knowledge of getting to know yourself and just being able to free up your schedule. Outside of his professional life, he is the loving husband of Andrea, and he has three children, Amanda, Dominic, and Mary. And without further ado, I welcome Frank Castillo. Frank, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for being here.
Chris, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Of course, man. So I gave you a brief introduction. Nothing I'm sure could ever fill exactly who you are, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about who you are, your mission, and what you're doing today.
Yeah, let me just actually step you through my history and a bit of my background as well. As you mentioned, April 15th, I was, you call it the chosen ones. I don't want to jinx everyone by saying that sort of thing, but I was born on April 15th. Actually, my parents are Cuban immigrants. They both came from Havana. They left Cuba I want to say 2 weeks before the Bay of Pigs invasion, when wow. Castro came in. $5 in the suitcase. I remember I'm actually with my mom these days. She's in memory care, and so she's sharing a lot of these older stories because those are the things that she can remember. And she was telling me about how they slept in the park to get their paperwork stamped, and they had to sleep in the park for like a week or days on end, up to a week, just to get on one of the last planes, because once the Bay of Pigs invasion took place, they shut down flights for the next few years. They had to inventory everything. They got everything on like I said, $5 in a suitcase. They came into the country, landed in Miami. They had some family already there. My brother was born there. He's my one sibling. And then my uncle had said, there's a whole lot of jobs up in the Boston area. Let's go up there. So I grew up in an all-Irish neighborhood as the only Cuban kid. And I remember specifically asking my parents, like, how did I learn English? And they said it was just Sesame Street or whatever was on TV, because there was no bilingual education. You just sort of went into it. So, that was sort of the journey. And part of my journey in accounting was to just, make sure that we had some stability. But, I had a natural inclination to it, particularly on the tax side. Went to college at UMass Amherst, graduated in '88. So I've been in the business for north of 30 years. And I've seen everything from, Tax Reform Act of 1986, which was probably way before you were ever born, and maybe some of your guests out there, but I mean, some of your listeners, but all the way to today. And what's interesting is, lots changed, but in some ways, when we look at work-life balance, nothing's changed.
Yep.
Everything's been, we still experience all the same hardships. So much of what I've been working on the past really few years, I've been in the continuing education space for the last 5-6 years, is to talk about burnout, overtime, and the impacts that these have on our individual lives. And this applies not only to accountants all across the United States, but everyone. I think we find this in the tech sector. We find this in so many other professions out there, that people just don't want to grind like that, or feel like there's a better way to go about their everyday lives.
Yeah, man, that's good. And yeah, that jumps right into it, because that's honestly what kind of pulled me away from the professional background, was that, especially during a pandemic where it's very hard to shut off work, and it seems like you're being demanded to work all the time. Being able to step away from that and ask yourself, what is my greater purpose and why am I doing all this? And then you turn to some things that really mean a lot. But all that to say also that I think the entrepreneurial realm kind of gets a part of this, a piece of this as well, right? The burnout, like there's this grind all day mentality. So where do you toe the line, I guess, in trying to find the balance? And also, I guess there's people that want the balance, but then there's also people that think you need to fill your entire schedule, and if you're not grinding from sun up to sundown, you're doing something wrong. So where do your beliefs play into that, and how do you help both sides of that story?
Sure. And let me just sort of circle back for a moment because you brought up a great point, which is when we work from home, I think what we've experienced over the past 18 months is altogether different than what I've seen over the past 20, 30 years.
Hmm.
The changes in for example, in the accounting world, and this is true, I think, in a lot of professions, that everyone can work remotely from home. So let's just look at that dynamic for a moment. When you're working from home, there was a great quote from a Google employee in some comment section. And he says, I don't work from home, I live at work.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people look at it that way, like they live at work. And I had a friend who used to literally have this tarp, this great big tarp, and he'd throw it over his computer. And I mean, we have laptops now, we can shut them down, but he would throw it over his computer because he said, that's when I physically knew I was done for the day. But a lot of us are always connected. We're always attached to our phones. We have that sort of Pavlovian dog knee-jerk reaction to having to check it on an everyday basis. So, we need to go ahead and try and adopt habits, but also leadership has to do this as well. And part of what I do with my coaching and my courses is to address to leadership that there has to be systems in place to be able to say, look, here's an email policy. If it's not important, you wait till the next day. Don't be sending emails at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, because then once you do that, once you incorporate that into the everyday cycle of things, then people aren't as apt to do it. Everyone has to play together nicely. But addressing some of the burnout part of your question, in working and where does it sort of, if you're not driving, you don't feel like you're getting things done, but at the same time, you can easily just find yourself running in circles and completely burned out. And I would say that burnout has various elements to it. There's not only just the excess of hours, but I find in the science that I've sort of researched is that burnout is primarily attributable to doing work that's meaningful, or I should say work that's not meaningful.
Yep.
That we find that if we are engaging in work, I forget what the number is, maybe around 40%. If we're spending 40 to 50% of our time on work that absolutely delivers no value to other individuals within an organization or clients, in that it doesn't suit us, it doesn't fit us, then we are frustrated. That's a big contribution to burnout. And then, so if we can recalibrate, have leadership be able to say, look, we're going to take this work and farm it out. It's not at your level, and you're going to work on things that are meaningful. Working more hours is a better option, or more attractive at that point than, grinding on stuff that just is ridiculous, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Wow, that's good, man. And I'm curious because I kind of, now that you say that, I kind of see that in my area where I went from the 9 to 5, really the 6 to 6 or 6 to 8 really lifestyle of working all the time, to doing something more meaningful and providing value to people that need it more and are more receptive of it. And so I'm curious, Frank, is that what got you onto this journey, and now are you seeing your value be provided in a level that you could never imagine, and is that what keeps you going? Is that the light that
Yeah,
turns you on?
absolutely. I mean, what you find is, look, life isn't linear. I think when we're young, we think it's like this, right?
Yeah.
It starts here, and you think it's just going to be this straight line. It isn't. It goes up, it goes down. You go through changes in your life. So it's how you rebound from those changes. And in my own personal journey, I've been in industry. I've worked for Fortune 500 companies. I've worked for large public accounting firms. I've had my own practice, and it was different things that I was seeking out. It all had sort of a common thread in my background and the work that I do. And this has really just been an extension of this. And particularly this course that I've put together, The Joyful Accountant, is primarily, it's a passion project. It really is to say, I've done a lot of these other things in life. Now I'm on to something else that is a greater meaning, because I think when we look at happiness, there's really three different types of elements that go into happiness. One is the absolute pleasure of being in the moment, whether you're at a restaurant or, on vacation and you're looking at the, Leaning Tower of Pisa, whatever the case is, you're enjoying the moment. The other element of it is giving. And that's where I'm at this stage of my career, is that I feel like, yes, obviously I want the business model to be successful, but it's giving back into the profession and to other professions, because I think a lot of these issues are the same regardless,
Mhm.
in ways in contributing with my thoughts and my observations and the science and the research I've done to say there's a different way forward, because my and they did a study, Chris,
Yep.
in Oxford, and they said, look, what's going to happen is in the next, they looked at all these different professions and said, where does technology and AI replace your job?
Mhm.
Like if you were doing, and I think the most protected of the jobs was a physical therapist, despite what you see in Brookstone with those massaging chairs, they're not going to get replaced.
Right.
Like that's a very specific thing. But at the bottom of that list were tax preparers,
Mhm.
advisors, bookkeepers, because the technology has grown so sophisticated.
Yep.
Whether it's financial statements, I mean, you have a background in this, whether putting financial statements together and putting a tax return together, that value proposition is drying up.
Yep.
That unless you are in a situation where you can sit there and be one-on-one with a client,
Mhm.
all the regulations with their own individual situation, I mean, that's the space where value exists. And if you don't do that, and if we don't make that move towards that, which is enhancing soft skills and some of what we're talking about today, then we're doomed. We're
Yeah.
absolutely doomed. So that's part of the reason why I felt, the need to sort of jump into space that really doesn't exist and,
Yeah.
scream from the mountaintop a bit.
Yeah. And it's admirable, Frank. I'll tell you that much. One of the things that I brought to your attention before we got on here was that I realized there were a lot of problems in the accounting industry, but for somebody to want to go ahead and make a change is all the more greater. So I honor you for that, and I'm curious as to what drove that and kind of how you saw yourself as being that voice of reason in an industry that's been around forever, and there's been this mindset forever that the work doesn't stop.
Well, I would think that, having the experience that as I've had, I've lived on the West Coast, the East Coast, up in New England, down in Florida, worked in a lot of different environments. I heard the same message from everyone, Chris. Everybody was, well, they're not saying it out loud in a meeting, but they're like, Frank, this is really pretty, rotten. This, that, it's all the same message over and over again. And I'm thinking it's not an individual situation. This
Mhm.
isn't just, one person who's not fit for this work. It's at every level across the board. And, we all say it and we all see it. And, part of this is stereotypes, right? That, we're made out to be these sort of ogres that live under a bridge and you don't have a life and you go work, and I always thought,
Yeah.
no, I should have a life. I mean,
Mhm.
there were too many nights in my own personal world where I came home, my kids were already all in bed.
Mhm.
And, you do that enough years and it's just not a good way to live. I think that generationally, we're starting to see people come along, and I think it's a very good thing. The younger kids are coming along. Kids, I say kids, and I don't mean to be disparaging, but the younger generation's coming along, and I think that their values in terms of wanting a balance and wanting to make it work for everyone is right on point.
Yep.
Too many in our profession at my age are sitting there, having heart attacks and working
Mhm.
themselves, from one divorce and to another marriage and to another divorce.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. And I think some people in my business don't want to hear that, but
Yeah.
you know, it
Right.
is what it is, as the
Yeah.
expression goes.
Amen, man. And I can tell, Frank, that you have a pretty big heart to be wanting to do this and to create this change. Is that something that's always been a part of you, or has that grown as you've developed and matured and seen different things?
Yeah, I think it's grown because you get to different stages of your life. My kids are now 22 and 21 and 18. So I have a bit more freedom to do these things. I think when they're younger and you're just trying to get your family up and running, it's hard. You press for time and now that I'm in sort of the education space, and I think that becomes the difficult part, is that you sometimes have people say, well, Frank, you haven't been in the business for, a long time, deep in the trenches. You sort of just, telling me everything that's terrible, but you're over here in protected turf
Yeah.
because you're in the education space. But, I still do some of that work because I want to be intimately involved with it. But no, I think it's been an evolution a little bit. I think the older we get, we want to feel more connected with the world, that we're doing some greater things. And I felt like this was a great time to be able to do it. I'd been thinking about these topics and these issues for many, many years, but as far as throwing an action plan together, I think this worked out great. Now that we're all virtual, clearly it's not just it's not necessary to go speak in person,
There he is. I think we're having some technical difficulties, but we will power through. The last thing you talked a little bit about the virtual there, and I want to commend you for the content that you put out there. I see that you create some videos and you do a great job speaking, and that's something that I think is needed, especially where you are, because like you said, we're all online, and people are definitely seeing that, and the right people as well. And I'll tailor this next point to something you touched upon earlier, which was the fact that it's got to be a top-down approach, and these organizations have to be able to say, like, you don't need to respond to your email at 8, 9, or 10 at night. Like, that can wait till the next morning. Frank, how do you approach that situation? Because there are some people in these organizations that have been there for 10, 15, 20 years that have that grind mentality, that sunrise to sun up mentality is instilled deep within them. So if you want it top down, you also need to do it from a person to person basis.
Yeah, I would comment on that. A couple of different things. One is, the common thread, and I speak about this in my course, is courage. It takes courage, and this takes courage at every level. It takes courage from leadership because, the older we get, I promise you this, Chris, you'll look at, write it down 30 years from now, you'll realize you'll be my age and you'll see that, you get set in your ways. And I think some people are just afraid of what what's going on. And I should say that that's their comfort zone, particularly these last 18 months where everything's sort of just gotten so crazy. But many of, baby boomers and maybe, my generation, they are, they were forced to have to go virtual. I think a lot of them were, in the old days, they were like, we want FaceTime. I want you at your desk. I don't trust you doing your laundry at home and all that sort of thing. But they had no choice. So I think this has been a way to sort of break the iceberg a bit with respect to a bit more flexibility. But courage, it takes courage for leadership to say, look, there's got to be a new way. There's got to be a new way forward, because there aren't going to be people of their age coming in fresh out of college. It's the younger generation. And I mean, when we look at, for example, Gen Alpha, which is the generation from 2010 through, going forward, they have a completely different approach to learning. They are not ones that like to play and get along with each other from all of what's being told in the science, but their capacity to learn, where, you're used to being at a lectern and being a student in seats, they learn what they want to learn, individualized learning. So how we train, how we create an environment that's attractive for them to work at, because if you're just going to give them mandates from above, they're going to say no. And we see it with Branson over at Virgin, in Virgin Atlantic, and we see this with Elon Musk. He said they say, look, hire great people, put them in a spot where they succeed, and they tell you what to do, not the other way around. And unless you start adopting that mentality, then it's not going to work in the modern world. I can assure you that. And I think that leadership, and part of what I teach in the people to say, we can't have what's going on all the time. We put these hard policies in place regarding communication so that people live within those boundaries and provide them with the space to have a good life outside of just work.
Wow. That's awesome, man. And yeah, I'm floored about that because like you said, it's not only accountants that can use this for good, right? It's every industry and it's every human being really. So I honor and I respect that. And do you find that you have a lot of people in other industries coming to you for help, wellness, growth?
I haven't done that yet because part of
Okay.
what I'm trying to do is just sort of focus in on this. But I think that the evolution
Yep.
of my course and program will be to extend out to the tech world. It'll be
Yep.
able to extend out to attorneys and other professions and just, corporate America as we know it. Because I think that a lot of those lessons, there's some specifics in my course that are just tailored towards accounting and public accounting, but many of these lessons that we lean. So, for example, overtime science, when you look at the science of overtime, just pure hours,
Mhm.
anything above 50 hours a week starts becoming a hot mess in your outbox.
Yeah.
That once if you're doing 50 hours a week, time you get to 60 hours a week, if activity is basic. And so what you gotta, what we need to teach leadership and everyone is to say, no, we cap those hours because your output is not going to be much different. All
Mhm.
you've done is just sit there and redo things and make errors and mistakes and then correct them and then get angry and you're shopping on Amazon and you're just bitter at the whole process as opposed next day, next sort of virtual world. We can do that. If
Mhm.
I'm exhausted, we're going to have a great talk. I can take a nap after this.
Yep.
20 minutes in bed, I come back. I'm ready to go. So we
Right.
can live a little bit like that and not feel like we're stuck in an office working 12 hours and going back and forth. So
Mhm.
um, I think that there's so much that this the advent of technology and the pandemic has delivered us
Mhm.
that will truly change the nature of how we approach work. And if we don't adopt to it, then no, the next generation, they're gone.
Yep.
We're seeing it now with the great resignation that
Yeah.
people just are checking out because they don't want to do it the way things were in the past.
Mm. Mm. I like that. And so that actually ties into a great point that I wanted to ask you, Frank, was what would you say to somebody who's just getting started in their career or their life after college, or they're trying to make it on their own? They might have been fed this work routine where you go into the 9 to 5 or you go to the big Fortune 500 firm. What are your recommendations to somebody getting started and quickly realizing that that's not what they're looking for?
Well, I think what you have to find, I think you have to have a little bit of patience because
Mhm.
sometimes circumstances change. My one true bit of advice for anyone out there getting into the workforce now is that you have to understand that you have to demonstrate your value all the time, every time. And by what I mean by that is don't get complacent thinking,
Mhm.
hey, I'm doing all this work. I enjoy it. I'm at home and all that sort of thing. If you have an opportunity to network with people, do so. If
Wow.
you have an opportunity to go and make a presentation at the corporate headquarters or whatever, do so.
Mhm.
Because if you just become invisible on the other side of your camera and you're part of some Zoom meeting once a month and you think you're creating value, you may be, but nobody knows what you're doing
Mhm.
at different levels of the organization. And you may find yourself all of a sudden having your job eliminated. So
Yeah.
that's something that I would truly impress upon anyone who's sort of climbed, and this is true on every level, is that you have to demonstrate your value to people that are in a position to make decisions about your career going forward. There's
Mhm.
no question about that. So I think that's terribly important
Wow.
that
That's
we don't
awesome.
lose sight of the fact that we get too comfortable in a Zoom world here. You got to connect when you can connect
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
person.
And I like that because I do think that's a huge part is that we've almost lost the in-person stuff, but I've gone to a couple networking events recently and it's powerful, man. Just being able to shake a hand and say hello and have that one-on-one. And I can't imagine what that shows your employer, right? Or somebody
Yeah,
that,
and those are skills that are going to matter. That
Mhm.
again, AI and technology might replace a lot of the sort of mechanical things that we do, but it's the ability to sit there, because I almost look at Zoom in some ways as maintenance. Like, hey, we're having a meeting over this topic, right? But it's hard to brainstorm, like as opposed to when you're really with your friends and your colleagues in a room. You
Yeah.
can be a little bit silly, you can be a little bit weird, but you get things done that way. Like you can actually break out of some of the mental log jams that you experience by trying to get past a certain project or a certain responsibility that you have. So I think it's terribly important to, not lose sight of the fact that connecting in person is terribly important.
Wow, that's awesome, man. And I appreciate those tips and tricks. Couple last minute questions. I do have one on team building. I don't know if you've had experience with team building from the entrepreneurial level, but in maybe in your corporate level. Like, do you have any tips for somebody that's looking to build a team in this age, maybe looking to target some of those younger, driven, um, early career minds? It seems like you might have some experience and knowledge into that.
Yeah, and I would almost, and this almost sort of overlaps with the last point too, because you said, when I think about team building and I think of corporate culture, the one thing that I would also recommend to anyone who's younger, sort of getting into it is, I talk about actually in my course, you have to lead with passion, but you also have to follow with passion.
Mm,
I think sometimes we find that some people just think, oh, that stuff's hokey and it's
mm.
corny. Yeah, it kind of is. But at the same time, they're putting an effort together to bring people together. So I would say take advantage of that. Yeah, all right, we're doing some balloon race with, yeah, do it, be into it, because it's important for everyone to sort of have a little bit of buy-in. Yeah,
Right.
I think we get in trouble when we think, I'm too cool for all this stuff. It's over here, but I'm over here. No, like you've got to be a little bit open to all these different things. And I think what helps with that, and what I teach leadership is acknowledgement, particularly when we look at evaluations and praise, that we do it in a group setting, that we don't just simply wait once a year for an evaluation and we write a few lines and someone's evaluating us, they don't even know us. No, like you need to go ahead and say, I want to bring some people together, simple things. We're going to have some breakfast and we brought it in. And, I want to thank this person for their efforts on this and this one on this. And, you do that, make it as part of the routine of your engagement with your colleagues, because if you
Wow.
don't do those, that's terribly important. If you don't do those things, everyone sort of snakes out into their office and never sees each other.
Yep.
That it's those little things. It's the personal touch. If you see something somewhere and you say, wow, that reminds me of, my assistant, and let them know.
Yeah.
Let them know. I mean, those are the smallest little personal touches make all the difference in the world. And I think that's how you retain talent, and that's how you feel like you're part of a larger organization.
Yeah, man. I'll tell you, if the firms that I was working at were using you and had you advising them, I probably would still be there and be much happier as well. So, if you're listening and you have an accounting firm, be sure to contact Frank, or if you're in the accounting field, um, he knows what he's talking about, and he clearly can relate to individuals and does it well. So, honor to you, Frank. I thank you for your time. I do have two questions that I like to wrap up some episodes with, if you play with me just a little bit more. Um, the first
In
is,
the hot seat, I love it. Let's go.
yeah. This is traditionally a numbers podcast focused on finance and investing. So one question I ask is, what is one truth about money that you believe and most people do not?
That most people do not. Well, hard to say if most people do not, but I will say this: you cannot underestimate the value of cash.
Mm,
Cash in the bank, cash on hand, cash reserves.
wow.
Cash is king. It will continue to be king. It's always been the king. And in a world where credit seems so easy, in a low mortgage interest rate environment, and credit cards that you can kind of get compared to what rates used to be. And I don't foresee, Chris, anytime soon where rates are going to jump up. Otherwise, our $30 trillion debt will be $40 trillion debt
Yeah.
for the government. But at the same time, the advantage of having cash, and I'll share a very quick example with you if we still have time.
Yep.
I used to work with professional athletes. I used to be their personal CFO and all of that. And one thing that I would always stress is to save money in the first contract. Now, for an NBA athlete, they might have a 3-year deal with a 1-year extension. And I said, you've got to save cash in that first deal. And they said, no, I want to, I'll save it when I get to the next deal. I said, you've got to understand there's 2 real advantages to that. One is you develop the habits early. When you develop that habit early of saving, it's always going to be with you. And that's terribly important. Yeah. But I said, the second advantage is that when you get into your negotiation on your second contract and shopping out the market, if you've got reserves, you can hang on for a much better deal. If you're living paycheck to paycheck and blowing all your cash, you're going to, tell your agent, yeah, I'll take that one, or I'll take this deal. Yep. So you've got to be able to know, and this holds true for everyone in the marketplace, that if you've got cash on hand, well, if you're not particularly happy with the situation, you can take a little bit of a risk to bounce around and maybe do some different things, or, do a podcast like you're doing and do some other things, as opposed to if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you don't have cash, you are stuck grinding on the, treadmill that you're on forever and a day. So that would be my advice to your audience.
That's awesome, Frank. I think that's a great way to end it. I do have another question that kind of goes along the same line, is what is one myth that most people believe? But I think you did kind of touch upon it there in terms of.
All right, twofer. I got them both.
Yeah, you did. You did, Frank. Well, thank you so much for your time, man. I really love what you're doing, and I can't wait to release this and share it with my network. So I appreciate you. Is there anything that the audience can do for you to follow along, or maybe connect with you or purchase your products? Or
Of course. So my website's frankcastillocpa.com. Additionally, you can just type in thejoyfulaccountant.com in the URL and you'll get redirected to my site. I have video posts. I have written blogs, and my course is available there. My coaching's available there. If it's something that isn't of direct interest, feel free to sign on to my email list. I send out all sorts of information on a variety of topics. So I would love to have you sign up in that fashion as well. Or for those of you in the accounting profession and you've got some leadership that needs a little bit of a, jolt or changing things up, say, then we all have to step up.
Amen, man. Amen. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. This has been a fruitful episode. And again, I can't wait to share it.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you.
Have a great one.